The strangest thing about the night that changed my life wasn't the rain. It was the woman sitting perfectly still in the middle of it, as if she had nowhere else left to go. I remember gripping the steering wheel tighter as sheets of water crashed against my windshield, the wipers fighting a losing battle against one of the worst storms our town had seen all year. The digital clock on my dashboard read 10:47 p.m. I should have been home already. Instead, I was driving aimlessly through streets that felt as empty as the house waiting for me. 3 months earlier, I had signed the final papers ending a marriage I once believed would last forever. People tell you divorce is a new beginning. What they don't tell you is how quiet the beginning can feel. How every room suddenly seems too large. How every meal tastes different when no one is sitting across from you. The rain hammered the roof of my SUV as I turned onto an old county road lined with dark trees and shuttered businesses. That's when I saw her. At first, she looked like a shadow beneath the flickering light of a forgotten bus stop. Most people would have driven past. I almost did. But something about the way she sat there made me slow down. She wasn't checking a phone. She wasn't trying to stay dry. She wasn't even looking up at the storm. She simply sat on the weathered bench, soaked from head to toe, staring at the pavement as if the entire world had disappeared around her. My chest tightened for reasons I couldn't explain. I pulled over 20 yards ahead and sat there for several seconds. The heater hummed softly. The smell of coffee from an old travel mug lingered inside the car. Logic told me to keep driving. Common sense agreed. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that if I left, I would regret it. Finally, I grabbed my umbrella and stepped into the downpour. The cold rain instantly soaked my jeans below the knees. Water splashed across the cracked asphalt as I approached the shelter. Up close, she looked younger than I'd expected. Early 30s maybe. Blonde hair clung to her face. Her hands were wrapped tightly around something resting in her lap. She didn't seem startled when I stopped in front of her. If anything, she looked exhausted. Deeply exhausted. The kind that sleep alone could never fix. "Are you okay?" I asked over the sound of the storm. For a moment she didn't answer. Her eyes slowly lifted toward mine. They were strikingly green, but what I remember most wasn't their color. It was the sadness behind them. The loneliness. The quiet surrender. Rainwater dripped from the edge of the shelter roof between us. She studied me as if deciding whether I was real. Then her lips parted slightly. Her voice was barely louder than the rain itself. "Make me believe someone can still save me." The words settled into the darkness between us. And in that instant, something inside me shifted. I didn't know her name. I didn't know her story. I didn't know that the small object she held so tightly would soon unravel secrets neither of us were prepared to face. All I knew was that I couldn't leave her there alone. For several seconds neither of us moved. The rain continued to pound against the metal roof of the shelter, creating a steady rhythm that seemed to isolate us from the rest of the world. I searched her face for some sign that she was joking or exaggerating, but there was nothing theatrical about her expression. She looked like someone who had been carrying a burden for so long that she no longer remembered what it felt like to set it down. "Come on," I finally said softly. "Let me at least get you somewhere warm." Her eyes drifted toward the object in her lap. It was a small brass key attached to a faded leather tag. Even in the dim light, I could tell it was old. She wrapped her fingers around it instinctively before looking back at me. "I should not stay long," she said. Her voice was calm but tired. "You can decide that after you are dry," I replied. Something about that answer seemed to break through her hesitation. A few minutes later we were sitting inside my SUV. The heater blasted warm air through the vents while rain streamed across the windows. The difference in temperature caused a light fog to form on the glass. She held her hands near the dashboard vents as though she had forgotten what warmth felt like. Neither of us spoke much during the drive. I glanced at her occasionally while keeping my eyes mostly on the road. She sat quietly, staring out at the storm. Every now and then her thumb brushed over the brass key. By the time we reached my house, the rain had somehow become even heavier. The porch light cast a soft yellow glow across the driveway. I grabbed an extra towel from the hall closet while she stood awkwardly near the front door. "You can use the downstairs bathroom," I said. "There are clean clothes in the guest room. They will probably be too big, but they should help." A faint smile appeared for the first time. It transformed her face completely. "Thank you," she said. 20 minutes later she emerged wearing one of my oversized sweatshirts and a pair of gray sweatpants. Her blonde hair was still damp, falling loosely over her shoulders. She looked less like a stranger and more like someone who belonged in the warm light of the kitchen. I placed a mug of hot tea in front of her. The scent of chamomile filled the room. She wrapped both hands around the cup and closed her eyes briefly. "I am Claire," I said. "Claire Bennett." She opened her eyes. "Madison Hayes." Somehow hearing her name made everything feel more real. We sat across from each other at my kitchen table while the storm raged outside. The silence between us no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt careful, thoughtful, as if both of us were standing near the edge of something we did not fully understand yet. My gaze drifted toward the brass key resting beside her tea. Up close, I noticed faint markings carved into the metal. Numbers. Letters. Almost like an old storage unit or safety deposit identifier. Madison noticed me looking. Her expression changed instantly. Not fear exactly. Something closer to concern. She picked up the key and held it tightly. "That key is the reason everything happened," she said quietly. Then she looked down into her tea and added words that sent a chill through me despite the warmth of the room. "And if I tell you what it opens, your life might never be the same again." The storm continued long past midnight. Rain tapped steadily against the kitchen windows while Madison and I sat across from each other, beneath the warm glow of a single pendant light. Her words lingered in my mind. "If I tell you what it opens, your life might never be the same again." Most people probably would have laughed that off as dramatic. Under normal circumstances I might have done the same. But there was something about Madison that made every sentence feel heavier than it sounded. She was not trying to impress me. She was not asking for sympathy. If anything, she looked like someone who wished she could forget the story entirely. I wrapped my hands around my mug and watched steam curl into the air. "Then maybe start with why you were sitting alone in a storm holding it," I said gently. Madison stared down at the brass key resting in her palm. For a few seconds, all I could hear was the hum of the refrigerator and the distant rumble of thunder. "A year ago, I thought my life was exactly where it was supposed to be," she finally said. "Good job. Nice apartment. People who claimed they cared about me." She gave a faint smile that never reached her eyes. "It turns out some people only care about the version of you that is easy to control." Something about that sentence struck a nerve. After my divorce, I had spent months realizing how many compromises I had mistaken for love. How many pieces of myself I had quietly given away. Madison continued speaking slowly, choosing every word with care. She explained that the key belonged to a storage unit several hours away. The unit had once belonged to someone she trusted completely. Someone who had promised to help her build a future. Instead, that relationship had left her questioning everything she believed about herself. "A few weeks ago, I found out the unit still existed," she said. "And I learned what was inside." I noticed her fingers tighten around the key again. "What is inside?" I asked. Madison looked toward the rain-covered window. "Proof." The answer only deepened the mystery. She let out a slow breath. "Letters. Documents. Records. Things that explain years of lies." Her voice remained calm, but I could hear the exhaustion beneath it. The kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying answers you never wanted to find. I should have felt skeptical. Instead, I felt curious. Deeply curious. Outside, another flash of lightning illuminated the backyard for a split second before darkness returned. Madison stood and walked toward the window. I joined her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We simply watched the rain falling through the night. Then she surprised me by asking a question. "Do you ever feel like your life split into two versions?" she said softly. "The version you thought you were living and the version that was actually happening?" I looked at my reflection in the glass. 3 months earlier, I would have answered differently. Now I understood exactly what she meant. "Every day," I admitted. Madison nodded slowly. When she turned back toward me, there was something new in her expression. Not happiness. Not yet. But perhaps the smallest trace of relief. As though sharing even a fraction of her secret had made the weight a little easier to carry. Neither of us knew it then, but by sunrise we would make a decision that would send both of us toward the truth hidden behind that brass key. The rain finally eased sometime before dawn, leaving the world outside wrapped in a silver-gray stillness. I must have fallen asleep for an hour or two on the living room couch because the smell of fresh coffee pulled me awake. For a moment I forgot Madison was there. Then I saw her standing by the kitchen counter, sunlight filtering through the windows behind her. The storm had passed, but the strange feeling that had entered my life with her remained. "I hope you do not mind," she said, holding up a coffee mug. "I found your coffee beans." I laughed softly. Anyone who makes coffee instead of waking me up is welcome to stay. It was the first genuine laugh I had heard from her. We sat together at the kitchen table while the morning brightened around us. The brass key rested between us like a third participant in the conversation. In daylight it looked even older. The numbers engraved on one side were worn from years of handling. Madison traced them with her finger. "The storage facility is about 3 hours from here," she said. "I was supposed to go yesterday." "What stopped you?" I asked. She hesitated. "Fear." The honesty in her answer caught me off guard. Most people disguise fear behind excuses. Madison simply named it. She looked out the window toward the wet backyard. "Sometimes you spend so long avoiding the truth that when it is finally within reach, you are terrified to touch it." I understood that feeling better than I wanted to admit. My divorce had taught me how easy it was to ignore uncomfortable realities until they became impossible to escape. The kitchen fell quiet again. Outside, water dripped from tree branches. Somewhere down the street a lawnmower started. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary life. Yet nothing felt ordinary anymore. My eyes returned to the key. "What happens if you never open it?" I asked. Madison gave a sad smile. "Then I spend the rest of my life wondering." Those words settled heavily between us. I looked at the woman who had been a complete stranger less than 12 hours earlier. Somehow it already felt as though our lives had become connected by something neither of us fully understood. Maybe it was the storm. Maybe it was loneliness. Maybe it was simply timing. Whatever the reason, I heard myself say something unexpected. "I will go with you." Madison blinked. "Claire, you do not even know me." "That may be true," I said. "But I know what it feels like to stand in front of a door you are afraid to open." For a second her eyes shimmered with emotion before she looked down. The faint smile returned. This time it stayed. By late morning we were on the road. The highway stretched ahead beneath a clear sky that looked impossible after the night before. Madison sat in the passenger seat holding the key while fields and small towns passed outside the windows. We talked more during those 3 hours than we had all night. Not about secrets. Not about the storage unit. We talked about favorite books, bad jobs, childhood memories, and places we still hope to visit someday. Somewhere along that drive the tension between us began to soften. Then just after noon, a weathered sign appeared beside the highway. Madison saw it at the same moment I did. Her posture immediately stiffened. We had arrived. And whatever waited behind that brass key was finally only minutes away. The storage facility sat on the edge of a small town that looked frozen in time. A faded American flag fluttered outside the office while rows of metal doors stretched beneath the afternoon sun. My stomach tightened as Madison and I stepped out of the SUV. The confidence she had slowly built during the drive seemed to disappear the moment she saw the building. She stood still for a second, staring at the long rows of units as though they held every mistake she had ever tried to leave behind. "We can leave if you want," I said quietly. Madison shook her head. "If I leave now, I will never come back." We walked into the office together. An older man behind the counter checked a file folder, verified a few details, and handed Madison a clipboard. The entire process felt strangely ordinary considering how much emotion was attached to that small brass key. A few minutes later we found ourselves standing in front of Unit B214. The numbers matched the engraving on the key exactly. Madison's hand trembled slightly as she inserted it into the lock. The metal clicked. Neither of us spoke. The sound seemed louder than it should have been. Slowly she lifted the door. Dust floated through the sunlight that spilled inside. The unit was smaller than I expected. There were no stacks of mysterious boxes reaching the ceiling. No dramatic discoveries waiting in plain sight. Instead, there were 6 neatly labeled storage containers, a filing cabinet, and several cardboard boxes arranged with careful precision. Madison let out a long breath. "It is all still here." Together we stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of paper and dust. Madison knelt beside the nearest container and opened it. Inside were hundreds of documents organized into folders. Letters. Financial records. Contracts. Journals. Years of carefully preserved information. At first glance it looked overwhelming. Then Madison pulled out a thick envelope and handed it to me. "Read the date," she said. I looked down. The letter had been written almost 7 years earlier. Madison sat on the concrete floor and opened another folder. As she skimmed the pages, her expression shifted from anxiety to disbelief. "I knew some of it," she whispered. "But not all of it." For the next hour we carefully sorted through the contents. What emerged was not a story of crime or danger. It was something quieter and, in many ways, more painful. The documents revealed years of manipulation, hidden financial decisions, broken promises, and private conversations that had been concealed from Madison by someone she had once trusted completely. Piece by piece, an entirely different version of her past began to appear. Several times she stopped reading and simply stared ahead. I sat beside her, offering no advice because none seemed appropriate. Sometimes people do not need solutions. Sometimes they only need someone willing to stay. Late in the afternoon, sunlight slanted through the partially open storage door. Madison closed another folder and wiped at her eyes. Then she looked at me with a fragile smile. "You know what surprises me most?" she asked. I shook my head. "I thought opening this door would destroy me." She glanced around the unit before looking back at me. "Instead, for the first time in years, I think it might finally set me free." We left the storage facility just before sunset, carrying only a few folders and a single box that Madison wanted to review more carefully. The rest could wait. For the first time since I had met her, she seemed lighter somehow, as though years of uncertainty had finally begun to loosen their grip. We stopped at a small diner along the highway on the drive home. The place smelled like fresh coffee and baked pie, the kind of place where regular customers were greeted by name. Madison sat across from me in a booth near the window, turning a spoon slowly between her fingers. The orange glow of the setting sun stretched across the parking lot outside. "I cannot remember the last time I felt this tired," she admitted with a small laugh. "Or this relieved." I smiled. "That sounds like progress." She nodded. For a few moments we simply enjoyed the quiet. Then her phone vibrated on the table. I noticed the change in her expression immediately. The warmth disappeared from her face, replaced by hesitation. She looked at the screen but did not answer. The phone stopped ringing. A few seconds later another notification appeared. Then another. Madison turned the device face down. "Someone from your past?" I asked carefully. She stared out the window. "Someone who never liked losing control of a situation." The answer told me enough. I did not push further. When we finally returned to my house that evening, exhaustion settled over both of us. The box from the storage unit sat unopened on the kitchen table, while we reheated leftovers and talked about almost everything except the documents. It felt good to focus on ordinary things for a change. Movies we loved, places we wanted to visit, childhood memories that still made us laugh. Somewhere during those conversations I realized how comfortable her presence had become. Less than 2 days earlier she had been a stranger sitting alone in a storm. Now the house felt less empty when she was inside it. Later that night, after Madison had gone upstairs to the guest room, I remained in the kitchen staring at the unopened box. Curiosity eventually won. I lifted the lid. Inside were dozens of photographs, notebooks, and sealed envelopes. Most appeared harmless at first glance. Then I noticed a small journal tucked beneath the stack. The cover was worn from years of handling. A note was attached to the front in neat handwriting. "For Madison. Read when you are ready for the whole truth." My pulse quickened. I did not open it. It belonged to her. Still, the discovery felt significant. The final piece of a puzzle neither of us fully understood yet. The next morning sunlight streamed through the windows while birds chirped outside. Madison came downstairs and immediately noticed the journal sitting beside the coffee maker. She stopped walking. For several seconds she simply stared at it. Then she looked at me. Neither of us spoke. We did not need to. We both knew that whatever answers remained hidden inside those pages were about to change everything once again. Madison picked up the journal as though it might disappear if she waited too long. Morning sunlight spilled across the kitchen table, illuminating the worn cover and the faded note attached to it. For several seconds she simply held it without opening it. I poured 2 cups of coffee and sat across from her, giving her all the time she needed. Finally, she took a slow breath and opened the first page. The handwriting inside matched the note. Neat, careful, personal. As Madison began reading, the room seemed to grow quieter around us. Occasionally her eyes widened. Sometimes she stopped completely and stared at the page before continuing. Nearly 20 minutes passed before she finally looked up. There were tears in her eyes, but for the first time since I had met her, they did not seem to come from fear. They came from understanding. I spent years believing the wrong story, she said softly. She turned the journal toward me and pointed to several passages. The entries revealed conversations, decisions, and hidden sacrifices made by someone who had cared about her deeply. More importantly, they revealed how misunderstandings, assumptions, and outside influences had distorted the truth over time. What Madison had carried for years as guilt and confusion was only part of a much larger picture. Page after page dismantled beliefs she had accepted as facts. By noon we had worked through nearly half the journal. The emotional weight of it was exhausting. We took a break and sat on the back porch overlooking the yard. The air smelled of fresh-cut grass and summer flowers. A gentle breeze moved through the trees. Madison leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. "Do you know what is strange?" she asked. "I thought finding answers would make me angry." "And did it?" I asked. She shook her head. "No. It makes me sad for the person I used to be. The one who believed she deserved less than she did." Her words stayed with me, because in some ways I understood exactly what she meant. My marriage had ended months earlier, but I was only beginning to recognize how many parts of myself I had abandoned along the way. Somewhere between helping Madison search for her truth and confronting my own past, something unexpected had happened. The loneliness that had followed me for months no longer felt as heavy. Later that afternoon, Madison's phone buzzed again. This time she picked it up. She read the message quietly, then surprised me by smiling. Not because the message was pleasant, but because it no longer had power over her. She set the phone aside without responding. "A week ago that would have ruined my entire day," she admitted. "Now?" I asked. Madison looked toward the journal resting on the table beside us. Then she looked at me. "Now I finally know who I am listening to." The confidence in her voice felt different. Stronger. More certain. As evening approached, dark clouds began gathering on the horizon once again. A new storm was coming. Yet neither of us seemed concerned. Because for the first time since that rainy night brought our paths together, we were no longer running from the truth. We were walking directly toward it. The storm arrived just after sunset. Dark clouds rolled across the sky, swallowing the last traces of daylight while rain began tapping softly against the windows. Madison stood near the living room window watching the weather move in. The reflection in the glass showed a different woman than the one I had found days earlier at the bus stop. She still carried scars from the past, but she was no longer hiding from them. I joined her with 2 mugs of tea. The familiar scent of chamomile filled the room. For a while we simply listened to the rain. It felt strangely comforting now. Almost familiar. "Funny, isn't it?" Madison said quietly. "A few days ago I was terrified of what I might find. Now I am more afraid of what comes next." I understood exactly what she meant. Sometimes healing creates its own uncertainty. Once the weight is gone, you have to decide who you want to become without it. We settled onto the couch and continued reading the final pages of the journal together. The entries became increasingly personal. They described hopes that had never been expressed, truths that had never been spoken aloud, and opportunities that had been lost because of fear, misunderstanding, and silence. More than once Madison stopped reading and simply stared at the page. Each revelation seemed to rearrange another piece of her past. Eventually she closed the journal and rested her hand on the cover. "For years I thought my life was shaped by what happened to me," she said. "Now I realize it was shaped by what I chose to believe about myself afterward." The words lingered between us. Outside, rain streaked down the glass in silver lines. Inside, the room felt warm and safe. I found myself thinking about how much had changed in such a short time. My house no longer felt empty. My future no longer felt directionless. Somewhere during those long conversations, shared meals, road trips, and quiet moments, Madison had become important to me in a way I had never expected. She looked toward me then, her green eyes reflecting the soft light from the lamp beside the couch. "Claire, can I tell you something?" she asked. "Of course." A small smile touched her lips. "The night you stopped your car, I had completely lost faith in people. Not just in one person. In everyone. I thought kindness always came with conditions. I thought trust was something I could never have again." My chest tightened. Madison continued. "Then a stranger stood in the rain and asked if I was okay. For a moment neither of us spoke. The storm outside seemed distant now. You helped me find the truth," she said softly. I shook my head. "You found it yourself." Madison smiled. "Maybe. But I do not think I would have had the courage without you." The rain continued falling steadily beyond the windows. Yet instead of reminding us of fear or uncertainty, it reminded us of beginnings. Somewhere between the storm that brought us together and the answers we had uncovered, both of us had changed. And for the first time in a very long time, the future felt like something worth looking forward to. 1 year later, I found myself standing beneath a clear spring sky beside the same bus stop where everything had begun. The old shelter looked smaller than I remembered. The peeling paint was still there. The bench was still weathered. Yet the place felt completely different. Maybe because I was different. A gentle breeze moved through the trees while afternoon sunlight filtered across the empty road. I smiled as I looked down the street and saw Madison walking toward me. Her stride was confident now. The uncertainty that had once shadowed every step had faded. She carried herself like someone who finally trusted her own voice. When she reached me, she laughed softly. "I cannot believe you talked me into coming back here." "I seem to remember you agreeing pretty quickly," I replied. "Only because you promised coffee afterward." I handed her the cup I had been holding. She accepted it with a grateful smile. For a few moments we stood together, looking at the shelter in comfortable silence. A year earlier, this place had witnessed two strangers crossing paths in the middle of a storm. Neither of us could have imagined everything that would follow. The journal had led Madison toward answers she had spent years searching for. Those answers had not solved every problem overnight. Real life rarely works that way. But they had given her something more valuable than certainty. They had given her freedom. Freedom to stop carrying blame that never belonged to her. Freedom to stop measuring herself by someone else's version of the truth. As for me, I had spent months rebuilding parts of my life that I thought were gone forever. I had learned that healing does not happen all at once. It arrives in quiet moments. Shared conversations. Unexpected friendships. Small choices repeated day after day. Madison looked toward the road where rainwater had once rushed along the curb. "Do you ever think about how easily we could have missed each other?" she asked. I laughed. "All the time." The thought still amazed me. One different turn. One earlier stop. One decision to keep driving. Any of those choices would have changed everything. Instead, life had brought us to the exact same place at the exact same time. Madison glanced at me and shook her head with a smile. "You know, when you first stopped your car, I thought the universe was playing another cruel joke." "And now?" I asked. She looked up at the bright sky. "Now I think it might have been giving me a second chance." Her answer settled warmly in my chest. We started walking toward the small coffee shop across the street. Halfway there, I paused and looked back one last time. The bus stop stood quiet beneath the afternoon sun. No storm. No fear. No uncertainty. Just a simple reminder that lives can change in ways we never expect. Madison slipped her arm through mine as we continued walking. Ahead of us stretched an ordinary day filled with ordinary possibilities. Yet somehow that felt extraordinary. Because the greatest thing either of us found that year was not hidden inside a storage unit or written inside a journal. It was the realization that even after disappointment, heartbreak, and loss, life still had the ability to surprise us. And sometimes the most important new beginning arrives disguised as a rainy night, a stranger's kindness, and a choice to stop and ask a simple question.